Imagine you wake up one morning to find out your family's history has been erased, not forgotten, erased. Every ancestor, every victory, every contribution, gone from the pages of the nation they helped build. Imagine walking into a library of your country's story, opening the history books, and realizing your people are barely mentioned, and when they are, it's only in the chapters about suffering. But what if I told you there's another story, one deliberately buried under centuries of silence? A story of brilliance, betrayal, and resistance. A story so powerful it could rewrite how we see America itself. This is the secret history they don't teach about Black America. For most people, history begins with what's been written. But for Black America, the real story lives in what was deleted. Before the first enslaved Africans were brought to Jamestown in 1619, there were free Black explorers, soldiers, and traders already shaping the New World. Men like Estevanico, a Moroccan explorer who guided Spanish expeditions across the American Southwest in the 1500s, decades before Jamestown. He was among the first non-natives to set foot in what's now Texas and New Mexico. Yet, how many textbooks mention him? Almost none, because the story America chose to tell needed a beginning that justified power. If Black people were portrayed only as captives, then the system that enslaved them could call itself destiny. From the start, America wasn't just building colonies. It was building a narrative. And narratives are the most powerful form of control. They decide who's remembered as a hero and who's left as a footnote. Fast forward to the Revolutionary War. In the images we're taught, it's George Washington crossing the Delaware, muskets firing, flags waving. But in the shadows of that picture stood thousands of Black soldiers, enslaved and free, fighting for a freedom they were never guaranteed. Crispus Attucks, a Black indigenous man, became the first to die for the American Revolution during the Boston Massacre of 1770. His death helped spark the rebellion itself. Yet, when the Constitution was signed years later, the very same nation he helped ignite still saw him, and others like him, as 3/5 of a person. That's the first paradox in the American story. Black people fought to create a country that immediately excluded them. But what most don't know is how close that contradiction came to breaking the Union before it even began. During the Constitutional Convention, heated debates raged over slavery. Delegates from the Deep South threatened to walk out if slavery was touched. Northern delegates, eager to form a unified nation, made a fateful compromise, one that permanently wrote inequality into the country's DNA. That compromise, historians now say, was the true birth of institutional racism in America, not just in practice, but on paper. When we hear Black Wall Street, most think of Tulsa, 1921, but that wasn't the first or the last. Across the 19th century, long before Jim Crow's full grip, entire Black towns emerged as beacons of self-reliance. Eatonville, Florida, Rosewood, Seneca Village in Manhattan. Founded in the 1820s by free Black landowners who bought their plots when few others dared sell to them. Seneca Village grew into a thriving community of schools, churches, and middle-class families, right in the heart of what would become New York City. But in 1857, the city government decided it wanted that land for something greater, Central Park. Officials claimed eminent domain, bulldozed homes, and erased the neighborhood from the map. Today, millions walk over it daily, never knowing a Black village once stood beneath their feet. This pattern, Black progress followed by erasure, became one of the machine's most consistent gears. By 1860, the wealth of the United States was measured not in gold, but in bodies. 4 million enslaved people represented the single largest financial asset in the nation, worth more than all U.S. railroads, factories, and banks combined. Every cotton bale that left southern ports was a deposit into America's economic rise. Northern banks underwrote it. British insurers profited from it. Ivy League universities invested their endowments in it. Slavery wasn't just a southern sin. It was a national business model. Letters from planters described enslaved Africans as machines that never tire. And when those machines broke, new ones were imported. It was capitalism's cruelest innovation, turning human beings into perpetual capital. And long after abolition, that logic never truly ended. It merely evolved. When the Civil War ended, the air buzzed with impossible hope. For a million people, once considered property, now declared free. Union General William T. Sherman issued Special Field Order No. 15, granting 40 acres of confiscated land along the southern coast to freed families. For a brief, shining moment, it worked. Black farmers planted crops, built schools, started governments. Then came Andrew Johnson. In one of the most catastrophic betrayals in American history, President Johnson overturned Sherman's order and returned the land to ex-Confederates. Thousands of freed families were thrown off their land, sometimes at gunpoint, forced back into wage slavery on the same plantations they once worked. It was as if the nation had declared freedom, then quietly rescinded it. And to seal that betrayal, the Freedmen's Bank, created to protect newly freed people's savings, collapsed after white trustees gambled away deposits. When the bank failed in 1874, it destroyed the first generation of black capital. The message was clear. Even freedom would be policed by the same hands that once held the whip. By the late 1800s, a sinister workaround appeared: convict leasing. Southern states began arresting black men for crimes like vagrancy, simply being unemployed, and leasing them to private companies. These men built railroads, mined coal, and laid roads under conditions so brutal that death rates sometimes exceeded those of slavery. In some states, over 90% of prisoners were black. It was slavery rebranded as justice, and it generated millions in profit for states and corporations. This system quietly lasted into the 1940s. Even as the country celebrated its industrial progress, its foundations were being built by forced black labor hidden behind prison walls. But perhaps the most powerful weapon wasn't chains or laws. It was the control of memory. After Reconstruction, textbooks written by white historians reframed slavery as a civilizing institution. They glorified Confederate generals as noble heroes and painted Reconstruction governments, where black men held office, as corrupt. By the early 20th century, a new generation grew up believing slavery wasn't that bad. Hollywood joined in with films like The Birth of a Nation in 1915, which portrayed the Ku Klux Klan as saviors of the South. The lie became legend. And every time a black community tried to rise, Tulsa, Wilmington, Rosewood, the truth of their destruction was buried under silence, police reports, or lost archives. A century later, many descendants still can't trace their family history because the records were literally burned. Fast forward to the New Deal era. While white America rebuilt through programs like the FHA and Social Security, black Americans were intentionally cut out. Entire neighborhoods were outlined in red ink on federal maps, labeled hazardous. Banks refused loans. Property values plummeted. Meanwhile, white suburbs, funded by those same federal dollars, boomed. Homeownership became the engine of generational wealth. But for black families, the gates were locked. Even black veterans returning from World War II were denied GI Bill benefits that transformed millions of white veterans into homeowners. The system had evolved again, no longer chains and plantations, but policies and paperwork. Racism had gone bureaucratic. By the 1970s, overt segregation laws were gone, but the results were already baked into the landscape. Black neighborhoods, starved of investment, became high-risk zones. Schools funded by property taxes perpetuated inequality. When the drug war hit in the 1980s, it targeted those same neighborhoods, turning poverty into profit for the prison industry. Private prisons, bail bondsmen, and surveillance companies made billions. It was the old machine with new gears. The players changed, the uniforms changed, but the outcome stayed the same. Every decade promised progress. Every decade delivered new methods of control. Today, entire state legislatures are fighting to ban discussions of systemic racism in classrooms. Books about black history are being pulled from shelves under the banner of anti-CRT. Once again, the machine is rewriting its manual. Once again, the story is being sanitized. But here's the thing. You can't erase what's already engraved in blood, in land, and in memory. Because beneath every highway that cuts through a black neighborhood, there's a destroyed community like Haiti in Durham or Black Bottom in Detroit. Beneath every gleaming downtown, there's a ghost town of dreams deferred. America didn't just build cities. It built over the evidence. In the 1960s and 70s, as civil rights victories seemed to dismantle old structures, a quiet coalition of economists, politicians, and lobbyists began designing a new economic architecture, one that looked race-neutral but functioned like the same machine. Urban renewal became a euphemism for displacement. Tax codes favored inherited wealth. Corporations moved factories overseas, leaving black workers jobless in hollowed-out cities. And in the 2000s, predatory lenders swarmed back, targeting black homeowners with subprime loans. When the housing market crashed, black wealth evaporated. Again, the same cycle, the same result. Extraction, collapse, silence. Look at any major American city. The red lines drawn in the 1930s still match maps of poverty and policing today. Where investment stopped, surveillance began. In Chicago, the life expectancy gap between majority white and majority black neighborhoods is 30 years. 30 years inside the same city. That's not coincidence. That's design. The blueprint has been hiding in plain sight all along. But even through centuries of obstruction, black America kept building. Every era produced innovators and geniuses whose names the system tried to bury. Lewis Latimer, who invented the carbon filament that made Edison's light bulb possible. Madam C.J. Walker, America's first self-made female millionaire. Garrett Morgan, who patented the traffic light and the gas mask. Yet, their stories are often summarized in a sentence, while others are given chapters. The erasure isn't just accidental, it's strategic. Because if you knew how much was built by black hands, the myth of white exceptionalism would crumble. If America's secret history of oppression is powerful, then its secret history of resistance is unstoppable. Now, let's open that file, the one marked classified, because for every blueprint of control, there was another drawn in secret, one designed to break the gears of the machine. When freedom was criminalized, education became rebellion. After the Civil War, thousands of black teachers, many of them formerly enslaved, traveled across the South with nothing but chalk courage and Bibles with pages missing. They built freedom schools in barns, basements, and brush arbors. White mobs burned them down. The next day, they rebuilt them. Women like Charlotte Fortin Grimke risked lynching to teach freed children to read. Mary McLeod Bethune, the daughter of former slaves, started a school with 5 students and 50 cents. It became Bethune-Cookman University. Each classroom was a quiet revolution, proof that knowledge was the first weapon the system feared. Because literacy meant memory, and memory was power. While history celebrates homestead pioneers heading west, it rarely mentions the black cooperatives who pooled money to buy land in the face of racial terror. In 1881, a network of freedmen in North Carolina founded the Colored Farmers Alliance, secretly teaching agricultural economics and collective bargaining. They were met with boycotts, sabotage, and bombings. Still, they kept growing. By 1910, black Americans own over 15 million acres of farmland. That number terrified white planters and bankers alike. So came the counterattack, Jim Crow deeds, discriminatory loans, forged signatures, and county tax seizures. By 1997, less than 2 million acres remained. But some land survived, quietly held in family trusts and churches, passed like contraband from generation to generation. Every surviving acre is a battlefield victory most Americans never heard of. The early 20th century saw a hidden boom beneath segregation's surface. When white banks refused loans, black visionaries built their own. Institutions like Maggie Lena Walker's St. Luke Penny Savings Bank financed homes and schools across Virginia. A.G. Gaston in Birmingham created an empire of insurance, banking, and real estate, so solid the Klan bombed his Motel 13 times. Yet still stands today. These weren't just businesses. They were resistance hubs. Money became the new language of protest. While marches filled streets, these banks filled ledgers with quiet power. And that power drew federal eyes. By the 1940s, the FBI launched surveillance programs labeling many black cooperatives as subversive economic groups. Because independence in America's racial code was often mistaken for threat. You've heard of COINTELPRO, the FBI's counterintelligence program that targeted black leaders. But what most don't know is that its roots began earlier under the Racial Matters Unit of the Bureau. From the 1930s onward, government files tracked thousands of black teachers, preachers, and businessmen under suspicion of race agitation, not because they advocated violence, but because they taught history. In one memo declassified in 2017, an agent wrote, "Negro history clubs are breeding grounds for discontent." Those clubs included study circles of writers like Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes, artists whose only weapon was a pen. The state understood something vital. Control the storytellers, and you control the soul. Music carried messages where pamphlets could not. Spirituals became protest codes. Blues became testimony. And when jazz hit Harlem, it was more than rhythm. It was rebellion set to tempo. During the Harlem Renaissance, poets like Claude McKay and Count T. Cullen wrote against erasure with elegance sharper than any blade. Their work declared, "We exist, we built, we endure." Later, the soul singers of the 60s, Nina Simone, Sam Cooke, Curtis Mayfield, turned radio waves into a battlefield of conscience. Every melody that said, "I'm black and proud," was a broadcast against centuries of propaganda. Culture became counter-programming, and for the first time, the machine had feedback noise it couldn't mute. By the 1950s, the resistance blueprint had evolved again into organization. The Montgomery bus boycott wasn't spontaneous. It was data-driven. Local teachers and accountants kept meticulous ledgers of carpool miles and donations. Ella Baker, often overshadowed by male leaders, built grassroots systems that trained students to lead the SNCC and register voters across the South. Behind every famous march was a spreadsheet of survival, a reminder that liberation was logistics. When white politicians defunded black schools, churches turned pews into classrooms. When banks denied mortgages, civil rights groups created freedom funds to buy homes outright. Every barrier produced a workaround. Every law inspired a loophole of liberation. And now, the secret you were promised. In 1969, under the Nixon administration, a quiet directive within the Department of Housing and Urban Development authorized what insiders nicknamed Operation Clean Sweep. Its public purpose, urban renewal. Its hidden outcome, the mass demolition of thriving black neighborhoods for highways, stadiums, and modernization. Over 1,600 communities were erased from maps between 1950 and 1980. Entire business districts, Bronzeville in Chicago, Haiti in Durham, the Fillmore in San Francisco, flattened under bulldozers. Files later showed many of these projects targeted census tracts with rising black property ownership. Progress itself had become the threat. And the ultimate insult? Government reports from the era celebrated the successful clearance of blighted zones, the same zones that had the highest rates of black home ownership in their cities. The program's archives were quietly sealed for decades. Only fragments remain. Today, the battlefield has shifted again. Algorithms decide whose job applications are seen, whose mortgages are approved, whose neighborhoods are high risk. It's redlining rewritten in code. But the resistance has evolved, too. Black technologists, historians, and activists are using data itself as a weapon, mapping lost towns, reconstructing family trees, building digital museums of erased stories. From a Descendants project in Louisiana to blackpast.org, a new generation is restoring what the textbooks deleted. The war on memory is meeting its match, a generation that refuses to forget. The first part of this story was about erasure, while the later part is about resurrection. Because the true legacy of Black America isn't just survival, it's reconstruction without permission. Every protest, every invention, every song was a blueprint for a freer nation, whether America wanted it or not. From the hush harbors of the 1800s to the encrypted chats of today, the mission has remained the same, to remember loudly enough that forgetting is no longer possible. So here we are, centuries later, still caught between erasure and emergence. The same machine that tried to bury history now fears its resurrection, because once the truth is remembered, the lie loses its power. Every time you share a story like this, you're rewiring that machine. Every time you say a forgotten name, you're editing the American script. History doesn't repeat, it responds. And this time, the response is global, because the story of Black America was never just about America. It's a mirror held to humanity, showing how far we can fall and how fiercely we can rise. Music swells, mix of gospel choir and low drums. This isn't the end of the story. It's the handoff, from the erase to the remembering, from silence to sound, from shadow to light. The revolution isn't coming. It's recording. If this series moved you, don't let it vanish in the algorithm. Comment a name of a Black hero history tried to erase. Share this story. Subscribe to Shadow Crime and help rebuild the archive, one truth at a time. Because they erased the past to control the future. Now we remember to reclaim it.